They didn't give him a medal. They gave him something that didn't breathe. The chamber was colder than any battlefield Daniel Cross remembered, a steady 28 degrees Fahrenheit rolling off the containment floor as white vapor curled around his boots. The hum of a high-capacity energy cage vibrating through the metal walls like a distant engine that never stopped. His service jacket still stiff with old insignia, 22 victories etched into records no one bothered to read anymore. And now this was his reward. A girl standing perfectly still inside a column of blue light, her skin faintly luminous like ocean glass under moonlight. Her eyes open but unfocused, not tracking, not reacting, just existing. Daniel stepped closer, boots echoing once, twice, then silence swallowing the sound. His wrist display flickered to life out of habit, bioscan cycling, heart rate irregular, respiration inconsistent, neural activity, active but patterned, too clean, too controlled. He frowned, leaning in slightly. "Hey," he said, voice low, almost careful, the kind of tone soldiers used. Around something unpredictable, no response, not even a blink, just the faint reflection of him in her eyes as if she were recording rather than seeing. The cage pulsed once, brighter, a soft crackle in the air brushing against his skin, and for a second he felt it. That same instinct that kept him alive through 22 fights. Something here wasn't right. Not dangerous in the way weapons were, but wrong in a way he couldn't name. He circled slowly, noting the anchor points, the reinforced emitters, the redundant power feeds. Nobody builds a cage like this for something harmless. His fingers hovered near the control panel, not touching, just close enough to feel the warmth of active circuits. "What did they do to you?" he muttered, more to himself than to her. And then, just for a fraction of a second, her eyes shifted, not fully, not like a person would, just a micro-adjustment, a recalibration. And suddenly his reflection centered perfectly in her gaze, precise, deliberate. Like a system locking onto a target, Daniel froze, breath catching without him realizing it. The room seemed to tighten, the hum growing louder, sharper, like pressure building behind a sealed door. He stepped back half an inch, just enough to test if it would follow. It did, perfectly, smoothly, no hesitation, no emotion, just alignment. And that's when he understood the first truth. She wasn't ignoring him. She was tracking him, studying him, waiting. The overhead lights flickered as a distant alarm chirped once, muted, like it hadn't decided yet if it mattered. Daniel's jaw tightened, something cold settling in his chest. Not fear, not exactly, but recognition, the kind that comes right before everything changes, because whatever she wasn't a reward, and somewhere beyond those walls, someone already knew it. The alarm did not sound again, but the silence after it felt heavier, like the room was holding its breath. Daniel kept his distance this time, about 6 feet, just outside the faint warmth radiating from the containment field. His eyes locked on hers, watching for that same unnatural precision. His wrist display continued to scroll data in soft green lines. Neural activity stable, but patterned, repeating in intervals too perfect to be instinct, too controlled to be free. He exhaled slowly, steadying himself the way he had before every unknown situation, not by force, but by attention. "You are not a machine," he said quietly, testing the words as much as her reaction. Nothing changed at first. The hum remained constant, the light steady. But then her fingers twitched, just once, barely noticeable, like a signal struggling through interference. Daniel leaned in slightly, careful, measured. "Can you hear me?" he asked, this time slower, clearer, and something shifted again. Her eyes did not move away, but the reflection inside them softened, not fully, just enough to break that perfect alignment. His display flickered, neural pattern deviation detected, small but real. He felt it immediately, not in the data, but in the air between them. A difference, subtle but undeniable, as if something inside her had noticed him not as a target, but as something else, a presence. The control panel beside the cage pulsed faintly, its interface waiting, locked behind authorization. He had not been given. Daniel glanced at it, then back at her. The instinct returned, stronger now. This was not supposed to be a conversation. This was containment, ownership, control, and yet here he was, talking to something that had just tried, in the smallest way possible, to respond, Footsteps echoed faintly beyond the chamber door, distant but approaching. His time was shrinking. He looked at her again, really looked this time, past the stillness, past the silence, searching for something human in something that was clearly not. "If you understand me," he said, voice lower now, almost a whisper, "you do not have to stay like this." The words hung in the cold air, fragile, uncertain, and for a moment nothing happened. Then the light inside the cage flickered, not from the system, but from her, a faint ripple across her skin, like light moving underwater. His display spiked, neural surge detected, unsynchronized, unpredictable, alive. Daniel's breath caught. This was not a program responding. This was something pushing back, something trying. The chamber lights dimmed slightly as power rerouted automatically, the system compensating for something it did not expect. The approaching footsteps grew louder now, closer, authority returning to reclaim what it believed it controlled. Daniel's eyes stayed on hers, unwavering. And this time when she adjusted, it was not perfect, it was imperfect, human in its hesitation. Her gaze shifted just a fraction off center, then back, like she was learning how to see him, not as a point, but as a person. And in that tiny, imperfect movement, Daniel understood the second truth. She was not waiting to be activated, she was waiting to be freed. The door slid open with a low hydraulic hiss, and the temperature shifted instantly. Warmer air pushing into the chamber as three uniformed officers stepped inside with precise, measured strides, their boots striking the metal floor in perfect rhythm. Daniel did not turn right away, his eyes still locked on hers, watching that fragile, imperfect focus hold for just a second longer before it flickered again, like she was struggling to keep it. "Step away from the containment field, Mr. Cross," the lead officer said, voice calm, practiced, the kind of tone used when the outcome was already decided. Daniel slowly straightened, but did not fully step back. "Not yet. You did not tell me what she is," he replied, his voice steady but quieter now, controlled. The officer paused for half a second, just enough to acknowledge the question without answering it. "You were not brought here for a briefing," he said instead, nodding toward the control panel. "You were brought here to accept the reward and leave." Daniel finally turned then, just slightly, enough to see them from the corner of his eye, their posture rigid, their attention divided between him and the figure behind the field. "That is not a reward," Daniel said, and this time his voice carried something heavier, not defiance, not anger, just certainty. The officer's expression did not change, but the silence behind his eyes did. "It is classified," he replied, "and it is not your concern." Daniel let out a slow breath, his gaze returning to her. She was watching again, not perfectly, not like before, but trying, the smallest delay in her tracking, the faintest hesitation in her focus. Human in a way nothing about her should have been. "She is trying to respond," Daniel said, almost to himself, but loud enough that the room heard it. One of the other officers shifted slightly, a glance exchanged, quick and subtle. "That is not possible," the lead officer said, sharper now, a hairline crack in the controlled tone. Daniel stepped closer to the panel, not touching it yet, but close enough that the system responded with a soft pulse of light. "Then why is your system compensating?" he asked, nodding toward the dimmed overheads, the faint hum deepening as power rerouted in real time. The officer did not answer immediately, and in that silence Daniel saw it, not fear, but recognition. They knew, they just did not expect him to notice. Behind the field her fingers moved again, a slight curl, then stillness, like she was testing the space inside herself. Daniel's wrist display flared briefly, neural activity spiking again, irregular, unscripted, alive. "Initiate transfer protocol," the officer ordered suddenly, his voice firm again, final, one of. The others moved to the panel on the opposite side, hands hovering over controls that had been waiting for this exact moment. The cage light intensified, a sharper tone cutting through the hum. Daniel's body reacted before his thoughts did, one step forward, closing the distance to less than 3 feet. "Wait," he said, not loud, but enough to pause the motion for a fraction of a second. Just enough. Her eyes snapped to him again. Not perfectly, not like a machine, but with effort, with strain, with something behind them now, something that did not belong to any system. And in that moment, with the room holding still around them, Daniel understood the third truth. They were not activating her. They were taking her choice away before she could make one. "Do not touch that panel," the officer said. And this time the calm was gone, replaced by something tighter, something urgent. Daniel did not look at him. His focus remained on the faint glow of the interface inches from his hand, the surface warm, alive, waiting. The cage behind him pulsed brighter, the frequency rising in pitch as if the system itself sensed the shift in intent. "You said she is not my concern," Daniel replied quietly. "But you brought me here anyway." The words hung between them, simple, undeniable. The officer took a step forward, closing the distance by one measured pace. "You were selected. Because of your record," he said, voice controlled again but thinner now. "You follow orders, you complete objectives, you do not hesitate." Daniel's reflection flickered across the panel glass as he finally turned his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge the man behind him. "That is where you are wrong," he said, and for the first time there was something else in his voice, not defiance, not rebellion, but choice. Behind the field her light shifted again, a ripple moving across her skin. Like a signal trying to break through static, her fingers curled tighter this time. Not random, not reflex, but deliberate. Daniel's wrist display surged with data. Neural activity no longer patterned, no longer controlled. It was diverging, evolving. The system was losing its hold. "Initiate full restraint protocol," the officer ordered sharply. The second technician's hands dropped onto the controls. The panel on the far side lit up with cascading symbols. The cage intensified, brighter, louder. The hum now a steady vibration through the floor. Daniel felt it in his bones. The pressure building, not outward, but inward, compressing, containing, forcing her back into silence. He stepped forward without thinking, closing the final distance to the primary panel, his hand hovering a fraction of an inch above the surface. The interface reacted instantly. Authorization request pulsing in red. Denied, denied, denied. "She is not a system," Daniel said, louder now, not to them, but to himself, grounding the thought, making it real. The officer moved again, faster this time. "Stand down," he snapped, the room tightening around the command. But Daniel did not move. Behind him her gaze locked onto his again, not perfect, not mechanical, but strained, reaching, like she was holding onto something slipping away. Her light flickered violently for a brief second, then steadied, weaker, dimmer. The system was winning. Daniel's jaw tightened. The years of training, of orders, followed without question, pressed against this moment, demanding compliance, demanding distance. But something else pushed back, quieter, stronger. The memory of that imperfect movement, that hesitation, that choice. His fingers lowered, just barely brushing the surface of the panel. The interface reacted with a sharp tone. Unauthorized contact. Warning indicators flashing. The officer stepped closer. Close enough now that Daniel could feel his presence behind him. "Last warning," he said, low. And final. Daniel did not turn. His eyes stayed on hers. And for the first time, she blinked. Not because of a system reset, not because of a command, but because something inside her chose to close and open again. Slow, uneven, human. The room seemed to stop around that single motion. And in that silence, Daniel made his decision. His hand flattened against the panel, ignoring the warnings, ignoring the voices. Because for the first time since he stepped into that room, he was not following orders. He was answering something else entirely. The panel resisted him at first, a sharp tone slicing through the chamber as red warnings cascaded across the interface. Unauthorized access, restricted command layer, system integrity risk. The words meant to stop him, to push him back into the role they had chosen for him. But his hand did not move. It stayed pressed flat against the surface, steady, grounded, the way he had learned to hold position under pressure, not with force, but with refusal to break. The interface flickered again, scanning, recalibrating, searching for a reason to deny him. And then something shifted, not in the system, but behind him. The light inside the containment field faltered, not dimming, but changing, like the frequency itself was being disturbed from within. Daniel's wrist display surged with data he had never seen before. Neural activity no longer chaotic, no longer suppressed. It was organizing, forming patterns that did not match any control sequence, but something else entirely, something self-directed. Override denied. The system repeated, but the tone had changed, less certain, less absolute. Daniel leaned closer to the panel, his breath steady, his voice low. Then do not override, he said, not to the officers, not even to the system, but to the moment itself. Just stop holding her. Behind him her presence shifted again. The air felt different now, charged in a way that had nothing to do with electricity, more like tension. Finally finding a direction, her fingers moved, not a twitch this time, not a reflex, but a slow, deliberate curl inward, then release, as if testing control over something that had always been taken from her. The officers behind him did not move immediately, and that hesitation spoke louder than any command. They were watching now, not controlling, not certain. The second technician's hands hovered over the controls without pressing them, waiting for instruction that had not come yet. Daniel's hand slid slightly across the panel, searching, not for a command, but for a response. The interface reacted in pulses, not unlocking, but listening, adapting, as if it could not decide whether he was a threat or a variable it had not accounted for. You are interfering with a classified process, the lead officer said, but his voice no longer carried authority, only urgency. Daniel did not answer. His focus remained on the connection forming between the panel and the presence behind him. Something invisible but real. The cage flickered again, this time uneven, the perfect symmetry breaking apart in small, irregular pulses, and then it happened. Not a shutdown, not a release, but a gap, less than a second, a flicker where the field weakened just enough for something inside it to push outward. Her light surged, not violently, but clearly, like a signal finally breaking through interference. Daniel felt it before he saw it, a shift in the air, a change in pressure, and when he turned his head, just slightly, her eyes were no longer empty. They were focused, not perfectly, not completely, but intentionally. She was looking at him, not because she was programmed to, not because the system aligned her that way, but because she chose to, and in that fragile, fleeting connection, Daniel understood that the system was no longer in control, not fully, not anymore. The question was no longer whether she could be activated, but whether she would choose to be. The chamber did not explode into chaos, it tightened instead, every system adjusting, recalculating, trying to reassert control over something that no longer fit its parameters. The containment field flickered in uneven pulses, no longer a perfect cylinder of light, but a breathing thing, expanding and contracting by fractions of an inch. Daniel kept his hand on the panel, not pressing, not forcing, just maintaining contact like a bridge that refused to collapse. His wrist display scrolled faster now, lines of data overlapping, neural activity stabilizing into something coherent, not controlled, not programmed, but chosen. Behind him she took a step. It was small, barely 2 inches, but it should not have been possible. The field resisted. The light warped around her movement, and for a moment the entire system seemed to hesitate, unsure whether to correct or adapt. The officers saw it. Daniel did not need to turn to know. The silence behind him shifted, sharp, alert, uncertain. Lock the field, the lead officer ordered, but the command lacked its former certainty. The technician's hands moved, slower this time, inputting sequences that had worked before, that should have worked now, but the response was delayed, fragmented. The system was no longer responding as expected. Daniel exhaled slowly, his voice low, steady. Do not fight it, he said. Not to the officers, not even to the system, but to her. The words carried no authority, no command, only an offer. She moved again, this time her head tilting slightly, not perfectly aligned, not mechanically precise, but searching, learning. The light across her skin rippled in soft waves, like something beneath the surface had finally found direction. Daniel's eyes met hers fully now. No glass, no reflection, just distance closing between 2 points that were no longer defined by the system around them. You can stop, he said quietly. You do not have to follow anything. The words hung in the charged air, fragile, almost lost beneath the rising hum. And for a second nothing changed. The field pulsed again, stronger, trying to compress, to stabilize, to return everything to order. Her body stilled. The light dimmed slightly. The system pushing back, reclaiming ground. Daniel felt it. The shift toward control, toward silence. And then she blinked again, slower this time, uneven, like the motion itself required effort. Her fingers lifted, not fully, just enough to break from their previous stillness. And then they lowered again, not because of restraint, but because she chose to stop. Daniel's breath caught. The distinction clear, undeniable. The system could force motion, but it could not create restraint. That came from something else, something inside her that had never been allowed to surface. The containment field flickered again. A brief distortion where the light bent around her rather than through her, as if the system no longer fully recognized her boundaries. The technician stepped back slightly, uncertainty breaking his rigid posture. "It is destabilizing," he said, not as a warning, but as a realization. Daniel finally lifted his hand from the panel, not because he was done, but because he understood now. This was no longer about the system. It was about her. He turned fully, facing her without anything between them but the thinning field. And in that moment, with the room suspended between control and collapse, Daniel understood the next truth. She was not breaking free by force. She was learning how to choose, and that was something no system had ever been designed to contain. The system tried one more time to correct what it did not understand. The containment field surged brighter, tighter, its frequency rising into a sharp, almost painful hum that pressed against the walls and the air alike. But this time the reaction was different. The light did not pass cleanly through her. It bent, warped, as if meeting resistance from something that was no longer passive. Daniel stood still, just outside the field. His hands lowered now, no longer touching the panel, no longer interfering, because he could see it clearly. This was no longer something he could do for her. This was something she had to decide. The officers behind him shifted again, tension breaking their perfect formation. "Reinforce the lock," the lead officer ordered. But even as the words left his mouth, they sounded outdated, like instructions written for a system that no longer existed in the same way. The technician input commands faster now, sequences overlapping, forcing the field to stabilize. But the response lagged, delayed by fractions of a second that should not have existed. Daniel watched her, not the light, not the system, just her. The way her posture changed, subtle but real, shoulders no longer perfectly aligned, head slightly tilted, as if balance itself was something new, something learned. "You can stop them," he said quietly, not as an order, not as a command, but as a reminder. Her eyes met his again. Not perfectly, not instantly, but with intention, that same fragile, human hesitation, the kind that comes before a decision is made. The field pulsed again, stronger, the light intensifying around her form, trying to compress, to force her back into stillness. Her body tensed, not from external force, but from within, like something inside her was pushing outward against invisible walls. Daniel's wrist display spiked again, neural activity no longer stabilizing but rising, not chaotic, not uncontrolled, but expanding, like a system growing beyond its limits. "She is exceeding containment parameters," the technician said, voice tight, no longer reporting, but realizing. Daniel did not move, his breathing steady, his focus unbroken. "Do not fight it," he repeated, softer this time, almost a whisper meant only for her. The room seemed to narrow around that single moment. The hum, the lights, the voices, all fading into the background as something else took center, something quieter, deeper. Her fingers lifted again, higher this time, not stopped halfway, not forced back down, but held there, trembling slightly, as if the act itself required effort, required choice. The light around her flickered violently for a brief second, then steadied, weaker than before, no longer uniform, no longer perfect. And then she moved, not a step, not yet, but a shift in weight, a subtle transfer that broke the last illusion of stillness. Daniel felt it, not as a shock, not as a surge, but as a release, like tension finally giving way to something else, something real. The officer took a step forward, urgency replacing control. "Deactivate her now," he ordered, but the command came too late, because in that exact moment, her gaze changed completely, no longer tracking, no longer aligning, but choosing. And for the first time, she was not looking at Daniel because she had to. She was looking at him because she wanted to, and in that choice, the system lost what little control it had left. The chamber did not collapse when control slipped. It quieted, the hum lowering into an uneven rhythm that no longer belonged to any system. The containment field shimmered like heat over asphalt, its edges no longer clean, no longer certain where it began or ended. Daniel did not move, his boots rooted to the cold floor as he watched her stand within that fading structure, no longer perfectly centered, no longer defined by it. The officers behind him hesitated in a way trained people were not supposed to, their commands slower, their movements no longer synchronized. "Shut it down," the lead officer said. But this time the words did not carry authority, they carried doubt. The technician's hands hovered above the controls, waiting for confirmation that never came, because the system itself had stopped responding in a way they understood. Daniel's wrist display flickered once, then went dark, unable to process what it could not categorize. And for the first time since he stepped into the room, there was no data, no readout, no measurement, only what he could see. She took another step, small but undeniable. The field resisted for a fraction of a second, then parted around her like something choosing not to hold on. Her foot touched the floor beyond the light, and nothing happened. No alarm spike, no system correction, just silence, real silence, the kind that comes when something ends. Daniel felt it in his chest, a shift that had nothing to do with physics, something deeper. She was no longer contained, not because the system failed, but because it no longer applied to her. Her head turned slowly, not with precision, not with alignment, but with curiosity, her gaze drifting across the room, taking in shapes, distances, light, like someone seeing the world for the first time. The faint glow across her skin softened, no longer pulsing in strict patterns, but flowing, responding to something internal rather than imposed. Daniel took a step forward, careful, measured, closing the distance to just a few feet. He did not reach out, did not speak immediately, because he understood now. This moment did not belong to him. It belonged to her. The officers remained still, not because they chose to, but because they did not know what to do. The absence of control had left them without direction. "She is outside containment," the technician said quietly, not as a warning, but as a statement of fact. The lead officer did not respond, his eyes fixed on the space where the field had once been absolute, now nothing more than a fading distortion in the air. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low, steady. "You are free." The words were simple, but they carried weight, not as a command, not as permission, but as recognition. Her gaze shifted again, slower this time, until it settled on him, not perfectly, not instantly, but with that same fragile intention, the kind that required effort. Her lips parted slightly, not to speak, not yet, but as if testing the idea of it, of expression, of choice. And in that quiet, suspended moment, with no system guiding her and no command defining her, Daniel realized the final truth. Freedom was not something given, it was something recognized, and she was just beginning to understand what that meant. No alarms followed her step, no system reclaimed her. The chamber simply remained still, like it had accepted something it could not reverse. Daniel stood a few feet away, his posture relaxed but deliberate, not approaching too fast, not retreating, giving her space that no one had ever given before. The officers behind him did not move, their silence heavier than any command they could have issued, because control required certainty, and certainty was gone. She shifted her weight again, slowly, carefully, as if learning the rules of gravity for the first time, her bare feet adjusting to the cold metal floor, her balance imperfect but real, each movement no longer aligned to anything external. Daniel watched every detail, not analyzing, not measuring, just witnessing. The faint glow beneath her skin softened further, no longer pulsing in rigid intervals, but responding subtly to her breath, to her awareness, to her. She lifted her hand slightly, fingers opening, then closing again, testing, feeling, and then her gaze returned to him, fully this time, not searching, not correcting, but choosing. The difference was unmistakable. Daniel exhaled slowly, a breath he had been holding longer than he realized. "You are not property," he said quietly, the words steady, grounded, not a declaration to the room, but a truth spoken into it. Her expression shifted, barely, a small tightening around her eyes. a hint of confusion, or perhaps recognition, something forming behind them that had never been allowed before. She took a step toward him, closer now, less than 3 feet between them, and still no system reacted, no field reformed, no warning triggered. The absence of resistance was almost louder than any alarm could have been. Daniel did not move to meet her. He stayed where he was, letting her close the distance on her own, her head tilted slightly, the motion uneven, human in its imperfection. And then, slowly, her lips moved, not forming words yet, but shaping something, trying, failing, trying again. A sound almost emerged, soft, broken, unfinished, but real. Daniel's eyes softened, not with relief, not with victory, but with understanding. This was not an ending. This was a beginning. Behind them, one of the officers shifted. A single step backward, subtle but undeniable. The first retreat, not from danger, but from something they could no longer define. The lead officer said nothing, because there was nothing left to command. Daniel lifted his hand slightly, not reaching for her, just raising it into the space between them. An open gesture, no force, no expectation, just an option. She looked at it, then back at him, hesitation flickering across her features, that same fragile pause before a decision. And then, slowly, she mirrored him, her hand lifting, not perfectly, not confidently, but willingly. Their fingers did not touch, not yet, but the space between them felt different, charged not with control, but with possibility. And in that quiet, suspended moment, with no orders left to follow and no system left to obey, Daniel understood the final truth. He had not freed her. He had only given her the chance to become something no one had ever allowed her to be, and whatever she chose next, it would finally be hers.